Story number 1. The Babysitter's Fight. You're a toddler, bundled in a stroller, rolling through Chicago's icy streets at night. Your babysitter, a teenage girl, hums softly, unaware a car is creeping behind you. It was Super Bowl Sunday. The car slows, matching your pace, its door swinging open in the dark. I was just a toddler, maybe around 2, and my parents had plans to watch the game at a bar with friends. A man lunges, snatching you from the stroller, his grip cold and tight. They hired a 16-year-old family friend to babysit me. Then chaos erupts, fists fly. A scream pierces the winter air, and a girl fights to save you. She had just one job, to stay in the house and not leave under any circumstances, and they wouldn't be gone long. You're too young to know, but this moment will be your first memory, etched in fear and fright. Of course, being sick, she didn't listen. The streets are empty, and danger is closing in. Instead, she decided to take me to a friend's house to watch the game with her. You're too small to grasp it, bundled in blankets, the cold biting your cheeks. I was too young to understand what was happening. She pushes the stroller, her breath fogging in the winter air, thinking she'll slip back before your parents notice. Just sitting in my little stroller while she wheeled me along the streets of Chicago at night in the middle of winter. The game ends, and panic sets in. She's late. We must have not gone far since we walked there. She hurries, the stroller rattling over cracked sidewalks, forgetting to buckle you in. She probably thought she'd be back before my parents even noticed. A car appears, its engine low, tailing you through the quiet streets. But after the game, she panicked and realized they might be home. You don't see it, but she does. Her steps quickening, heart racing. So, she grabbed me and started rushing me back. It's not just a car, it's a predator, and you're the prey. But in her haste, she forgot one very important detail. The car pulls closer, its headlights dim, matching your pace. She didn't buckle me into the stroller. The passenger door flies open, and a man leaps out, grabbing you from the stroller. We were heading down a quiet street not far from home when a car started crawling beside us. Your tiny body is yanked upward, the cold air sharp against your skin. It matched our pace. She screams, a sound that splits the night, and something in her snaps. Then the passenger side door flew open, and a man lunged out and grabbed me. She's no ordinary girl. She's a boxer, trained and fierce. It was that fast. Fists rain down. A knee slams into his ribs. A punch catches his throat. 1 second, I was rolling along the stroller, and the next, I was being pulled up by a stranger. He drops you, stunned, as she fights like a stormy. I don't remember the sound of my own crying, but what I remember is the chaos of the moment, the cold air, the scream that came from the babysitter. She's not backing down, and they didn't expect it. And then she snapped. The man stumbles, his partner in the car shouting, but she doesn't stop. What she did next is probably the only reason I'm here to tell this story. The car peels away, tires burning, vanishing into the dark. You see, what my parents hadn't considered when they hired her was that she happened to be an incredibly skilled boxer. She scoops you up, trembling, and sprints home, your stroller abandoned. Without hesitating, this 16-year-old beat the absolute living hell out of this guy. Your parents are there, their anger turning to horror as she spills the story. Fists were flying, a knee to the ribs, and a punch in the throat. They called the police, but the car is gone. The man a ghost. She didn't hold back. and he dropped me almost immediately. You're safe. But the night's mark is permanent. Whoever they were in that car, they clearly never expected a teenage girl to fight back like that. The fight saved you, but the fear never left. They peeled off in a screech of tires and vanished into the night. You're older now, but that night is your first memory. Wind, chaos, her fists. We sprinted home. Your parents never hired her again. Their trust broken, but they owed her your life. When my parents got back, they were furious. The police found nothing, no car, no man, just a report filed and forgotten. Of course, she had taken me out of their house, broken their trust. You dug into Chicago's crime logs later, finding similar attempts, kids targeted, cars vanishing, But once the reality of what almost happened sank in, the mood shifted from angry to shaken. You posted online, anonymously, on a survivors forum. We called the police, filed a report, others shared stories. Babysitters attacked, strangers in the night. The car was never found. A local cop mentioned gangs, quick grabs for ransom, but no proof stuck. The man was never identified, and nothing ever came of it. You felt less alone, but no safer. She never babysat for us again. That night shaped you, a memory you can't shake. You know the weirdest part? You live far from Chicago now, in a quiet town, but you check your locks, avoid dark streets. This attempted kidnapping is my first memory. You dream of the car door, her scream, the cold. It's the first thing my brain decided to hold on to. You told a friend, expecting disbelief, but she knew similar stories. Kids nearly taken, saved by chance. Not a birthday, not a stuffed animal, not a trip to the zoo, just the freezing wind, the open car door, and the blur of violence as a 16-year-old saved my life. You found a news clip from that year, a string of failed abductions, no arrests. And somewhere out there, there's a grown man who got his ass beat by a teenage girl trying to snatch a kid on Super Bowl Sunday. You contacted a retired detective who sighed. Cases like yours were too common, but too fleeting. No leads, just shadows. You're safe, but the night's weight lingers. You started a blog, sharing your story, warning parents about babysitters, about trust. Replies came, mothers, survivors, all touched by near misses. You speak at community events, urging vigilance. Your memory a cautionary tale. You don't walk alone at night. Don't trust quiet streets. The babysitter's name fades, but her fists don't. You hope she's out there, still fears, still fighting. You know one thing, some moments, even from a toddler's eyes, never let you go. Story number 2, The Sandwich Trap. The house was warm and quiet, but its walls hid a cold malice. I was 15, babysitting in our small town, expecting an easy night with 2 kids. Ren and Mika smiled like angels, but their eyes held a darkness that chilled my blood. A simple job turned sinister when I found glass in my sandwich. Their gift to me. This is the story of the children who wanted to break me, and the parents who let them try. The kitchen smelled of grilled cheese, but the air was heavy with unease. Ren and Mika were unlike any kids I'd watched. Too calm, too knowing, their whispers laced with menace. Every rule I set was a challenge they gleefully ignored, their laughter sharp as knives. Their parents' cold instructions echoed in my mind, a warning I hadn't heeded. Something was wrong here, not just with the kids, but with the house itself. I started babysitting when I was 15, mostly for my mom's coworkers or their neighbors. Our wooded town was tight-knit, or so it seemed. We lived in a small wooded town where everyone seemed to know everyone else. I took the job for cash. Craving mall trinkets? I did it mostly for the money to buy emo CDs and spiked bracelets from the mall. The parents were stiff, their rules rigid. Their parents? A stiff, overly formal couple with gray, tight-lipped smiles, handed me a rigidly detailed schedule. The kids were a whirlwind of defiance. Wren turned to Micah and said in a sing-song voice, "They're gone, all gone. Just us and the bones now." Micah spoke of a slicing game. "Let's play the slicing game." Wren's stare unnerved me. Wren whispered and stared at me unblinkingly as she slowly walked away. I kept them close after their talk of seances. Wren shrugged and said, "Fine. We'll go into the basement and do our seance instead." A crash shattered the quiet. I heard a loud crash, and I sprinted in to find a glass picture shattered on the floor. Wren stood by, emotionless. Wren stood beside it, stone-faced. "It slipped," she said flatly. Micah watched, unblinking. Micah sat on the couch, watching me with deadpan interest. I cleaned up, their gazes heavy. I swept the glass into a dustpan and dumped it in the trash. Dinner was a silent trap. Dinner was quiet, too quiet. They didn't eat, just stared. I noticed neither of them touched their food. Wren's voice was saccharine. "Aren't you going to eat?" Wren asked sweetly. Micah's words chilled me. Micah nodded. "We made yours special." I lifted the bread, and glass glinted. Shards meant to shred me. I lifted the top slice of my sandwich, and there it was. Shards of glass, clear, fine slivers. Their laughter was hollow, cruel. They laughed, but not like kids. No remorse, just glee in their eyes, waiting for my pain. There was no guilt, no fear, just pure satisfaction. Micah's whisper was venom. Micah leaned in and whispered, "We were just testing to see how soft your teeth are." I called my sister, trembling. I grabbed my flip phone and with shaking hands called my older sister, Julia. The parents' response was a cold dismissal. Their mother took one look and said, "Mike has been curious about experiments lately. I'll speak to him." They hugged their children, ignoring the plate of glass. Wren and Micah ran to them like perfect angels. Julia saw them later, watching from above. She saw something through the upstairs window. It was Ron and Micah just staring down, smiling. I never returned, but their smiles still haunt me. I never went back. Story number 3, The Poisoned Sippy Cup. The house was quiet when I got home, too quiet. My boys, Caleb and Owen, were sprawled on the couch, their eyes half closed, their faces pale. Melanie, the babysitter, smiled softly, her voice calm. But something in her eyes didn't match. A flicker, a secret. I scooped up Caleb, his body limp, and my heart twisted. This wasn't right. Night after night, it was the same. Owen, my energetic toddler, moved like he was underwater, his words stumbling, his laughter gone. Caleb, my baby, barely stirred, his giggles replaced by a stillness that chilled me. Melanie's explanations were smooth too smooth. But my gut screamed something was wrong, something was stealing my children. I watched them sleep, their breaths shallow, their faces too still. The house felt heavy, like it was holding a truth I couldn't see. I wanted to believe Melanie, her gentle voice, her grandmotherly warmth, but the boys weren't sick, weren't teething. They were fading, and I was the only one who seemed to notice. I couldn't shake it, couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces, their light dimming. I had to know, had to see. So I hid a camera, a small eye in the living room, praying it would show nothing, fearing it would show everything. What I saw broke me. This wasn't care. This was betrayal, a quiet, calculated kind. Melanie, the woman I trusted, was poisoning my children, not with malice, but with indifference. And I'd let her into our home. The truth was there, on the screen, and it was worse than any nightmare. After I had my second baby, I had to go back to work when he was around 6 months old. We couldn't afford full-time daycare. And a friend from my mill group recommended a woman called Melanie who'd babysat for them a few years ago. She was calm, reliable, and great with infants. And when I met her, she seemed nice enough, quiet, gentle, very grandma-like. Her house was tidy, her smile warm, her voice soft as she cooed over Caleb and Owen. She said she'd be happy to watch all the kids during the weekdays. I felt lucky, relieved to find someone so kind, so experienced. At first, everything seemed fine, but after about a week, I started noticing how out of it the boys seemed to be when I got home, like way too tired. Caleb would sleep through feedings, barely opening his eyes. Owen would be glossy-eyed. Their energy was gone, their spark dulled. Melanie would just smile and said, "They were so active today, they wore themselves out." I nodded, wanting to trust her, but doubt crept in. This kept happening day after day, and then Owen started stuttering. Not in a developmental way, but a nervous, anxious, stammering kind of stutter. Caleb, meanwhile, went from being a giggly, wiggly baby to just straight up limp. No interest in toys, no babbling, nothing. I watched them, my heart sinking with every sluggish movement, every empty stare. I brought it up to Melanie once and asked if they were maybe sick or teething, or if she'd noticed anything off. She just shook her head and said, "Nope, they're great sleepers. You're lucky." Her words were reassuring, but her eyes were distant, her smile too practiced. My husband, Mark, noticed it too, the way the boys weren't themselves, the way they collapsed into bed without a fight, without a sound. The house felt different when Melanie was there, like it was holding its breath, hiding something. I couldn't shake the feeling that my children were slipping away, not from illness, but from something deliberate, something I'd missed. We had to act, had to know, before, or it was too late. My husband and I decided to put a camera in the living room, nothing fancy. Just one of those Wi-Fi nanny cams that looks like a phone charger. We set it up quietly, our hands shaking, our voices low so Melanie wouldn't suspect. The first day, I checked the feed at work, my stomach in knots, and what we saw made me feel physically sick. She was caught on camera spooning a pink liquid, children's cough syrup, into Caleb's mouth in the high chair. For Owen, she mixed it into a sippy cup and told him to drink all of it and that it was nap time. It wasn't just once, it was a pattern. Every day within an hour of me dropping them off, she drugged them, put them into a dark room so she could watch TV and scroll on her phone all afternoon. My hands trembled as I watched, my vision blurring with tears and rage. Melanie, the woman I'd trusted, was dosing my children with medicine they didn't need, turning them into shadows of themselves so she could sit idle. I called Mark, my voice breaking, and we agreed. Call the police. Now, we called the police immediately. When they searched her bag, they found children's Benadryl and a second bottle of adult diphenhydramine hidden under our sink, which she had apparently been using too. We had no idea it was even there. Toxicology tests confirmed both kids had high levels of the drug in their system. Caleb had nearly 3 times the recommended dose for his age. She was arrested, charged with felony child endangerment, unauthorized administration of medicine, and a few other charges. She tried to argue in court that she was just trying to help them settle down and that she was overwhelmed with the 2 kids. She got 7 years in jail. Her excuses meant nothing. Her calm voice, her gentle smile, all a mask for negligence that could have killed my boys. My kids are okay now. Thankfully, Owen went through some therapy for the stuttering, and Caleb bounced back after a few months of recovery. But the scars lingered, not on them, but on me. Every quiet moment, every nap brought it back. The image of that pink liquid, the sippy cup, the dark room where my children lay drugged. I'd trusted her, invited her in, and she'd betrayed us all. The guilt, the fear, it didn't fade. Not even when the boys laughed again. I still don't sleep right. I check on them constantly, and every time they're a little too quiet, I get flashbacks. I'd stand over their beds, watching their chest rise and fall, terrified of stillness. So yeah, if something feels wrong with your sitter, daycare nanny, anyone, believe your gut, even if everything looks perfect on the surface, because some people will do the unthinkable to make their job easier. What chills me the most is knowing how close we came to losing them. Cases like this aren't just disturbing, they've turned deadly. There are real stories out there where children were given just a little too much Benadryl or cold medicine to help them sleep, and they never woke. We were lucky, but other parents never get to say that. And if you're hearing this and have any doubts about who's caring for your child, don't wait. Trust your instincts. Ask questions and set up a camera. It could save a life. The aftermath was a blur of doctor visits, therapy sessions, and sleepless nights. Owen's stuttering faded, his bright smile returning, but he'd flinch at the sound of a TV, a reminder of those drugged afternoons. Caleb grew stronger, his giggles filling the house again, but I'd catch myself watching him too closely, searching for signs I'd missed before. Mark and I changed. Daycare was out. Family pitched in, and we never hired a sitter again. The camera stayed, its feed a constant check, a lifeline we couldn't let go. I researched cases like ours, desperate to understand. There were too many nannies, sitters, even parents dosing kids with medicine to help them rest, some with tragic ends. The stories haunted me, each one a reminder of how close we'd come. I joined a support group, shared our story, and heard others, each one a warning, a call to trust your gut. Melanie's name came up once from another mom whose child she'd watched years before. Same pattern, same drugs, but no camera, no proof. She'd slip through then, but not with us. One day I found Owen's old sippy cup in a box, its lid stained faintly pink, but I threw it out, my hand shaking, but the memory stayed, a scar I'd carry forever. I don't trust easily now. Don't leave my kids with anyone I don't know inside out. The world feels sharper, darker, but my boys are here, alive, and that's enough for now. Story number 4, The House of Silent Locks. I was 22 and fresh out of college when I landed what I thought was a dream job, a live-in nanny for a wealthy family in Connecticut's polished suburbs. The offer was a lifeline, a chance to escape the grind of post-grad uncertainty. Living nanny for an ultra-wealthy family in the suburbs of Connecticut, but dreams have a way of twisting, and this one was no exception. Their house looked like something out of a home design magazine. Clean and modern, sprawling lawns, custom everything. It was a palace of glass and every surface gleaming, every corner hiding something. I stepped inside, dazzled, unaware I'd walked into a cage. The family seemed perfect. At first, the parents were really nice and well-spoken. Victoria and Alan moved with the grace of people who owned the world. Their voices smooth, their smiles practiced. They had 2 children, Lily 6 and Max 9. The kids were quiet, their eyes holding secrets too heavy for their years. Sweet kids, a little quiet, especially Max, but nothing out of the ordinary. Lily's giggles were rare, Max's words rarer still. I told myself it was just shyness, but something in their stillness gnawed at me. The house was too quiet, too controlled, a stage for a play I didn't understand. The rules were a warning. On my first day, I was walked through the house and explained the rules. Victoria's tour was brisk, her tone light, but her words carried weight. Some of them made no sense. No junk food, no unsupervised screen time. But others struck me as excessive. The restrictions felt like chains, disguised as care. There were cameras in the hallways, motion sensors in the kids' rooms, and the biggest red flag, heavy-duty electronic locks on the outside of their bedroom doors. The locks were sleek, modern, but their purpose was anything but. These are for their safety. Their mother, Victoria, explained with a casual wave of her hand. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. The sister arms, at 9:30 every night, and it's automatic. We have an override code if they need me, of course. Safety, she said, but the word felt like a lie. The locks were a prison. I remember blinking, standing there trying to smile while my stomach turned a bit. The hallway seemed to narrow, the locks glinting like eyes. What kind of danger could possibly justify locking children in their own rooms? I wanted to ask, but my voice failed me. That second night, after I put the kids to bed, I heard the logs click into place. The sound was sharp, final. A sentence passed. A few seconds later, a red light blinked above each door. It pulsed like a heartbeat, a warning I couldn't ignore. I stood in the hallway for a moment, staring at them, and then walked downstairs to the kitchen, where Alan was having a glass of wine. His ease was a mask, his question a test. "Everything goes smoothly?" he asked. I nodded too quickly. "Yep, just getting used to the place." But I lied. I barely slept that night. The house was awake. Its stillness a scream. The truth was in the shadows. The locks weren't for safety. They were for control, for secrets too dark to name. I felt it in the air, in the way the house seemed to watch, its cameras unblinking, The kids knew it too. Their fear, a quiet thing, buried but alive. I was trapped, not by locks, but by the weight of what I didn't yet understand. The house was a puzzle, and I was only beginning to see its pieces. The house whispered its secrets. The next few weeks were filled with little things. The kids' behavior was a map of fear. Their reactions, small but telling. Max flinching whenever his father entered a room, his shoulders tensed, his eyes darting to the floor. Lily would whisper questions like, "Is Mommy going to check the doors tonight?" Her voice was soft, but her fear was loud. There were times late at night when I thought I heard soft knocking, almost like one of them was testing the door from the inside. The sound was faint, a plea swallowed by the house. Victoria always dismissed it. "Max sleepwalks," she once said. Her explanation was too quick, too rehearsed. I didn't believe her, but I played along, my smile as false as hers. The house was a theater, and we were all actors, playing parts we didn't choose. I searched for answers. I started digging quietly. I moved carefully. A guest in a house that didn't trust me. I didn't find anything at first. The family had scrubbed their online presence clean. Just charity events, business accolades, country club photos. Their lives were a polished facade, flawless but hollow. But the truth was there, hidden in plain sight. One night when I was alone in the office while Victoria and Alan were out, I'd opened a drawer that was supposed to be locked. The drawer yielded reluctantly, as if it knew what it held. Inside was a folder with old court dates. The papers were brittle, their words a poison. At first, they didn't make sense. Sealed records, legal jargon. But one word burned through the fog. But one word stood out again and again. Offender. Alan's name was there, tied to a crime that made my blood run cold. Alan had been convicted of sexual misconduct with a minor 20 years ago. The past wasn't buried, it was alive, locked in with the children. The house was a lie. Somehow he still held his position in finance, still hosted lavish parties, and still walked around with a Rolex and was clean-shaven. His charm was a mask, his wealth a shield. There it was in black and white. The locks weren't for the kids, they were for him, a barrier to keep his sins contained. The security system wasn't just for the kids' safety. It was a fortress built on fear and silence. The cameras didn't protect, they watched, ensuring no one spoke the truth. Max's flinches, Lily's whispers, they weren't quirks, they were cries for help. The house wasn't a home, it was a prison. Its locks, the bars of a cage I couldn't break. I lived with the truth, and it broke me. I lasted a year of walking a tightrope, of smiling through my fear, a year of pretending I didn't know, of documenting what I could without crossing lines that would get me fired. I took notes in secret, my heart racing with every word, a year of slowly trying to build trust with Max and Lily without alarming them. I read to them, listened to them, hoping my presence was a light in their dark. I tried to get out sooner, but it was complicated. The job came with housing, and my financial situation didn't give me many options. The house owned me, its walls closing in. I kept telling myself, just make it to the summer. You'd have just saved enough. Every day was a countdown, a battle to survive. I escaped, but they didn't. When I finally quit, Victoria didn't ask why. Her nod was cold, her words hollow. She just nodded and said, "You've been wonderful. Thank you." Her gratitude was a lie, a dismissal. I left that house with a shaking hand and a pounding heart. The air outside was freedom, but it tasted bitter. It's been a few years now, and I've had other jobs. I've built a life, but the house follows me. I've moved on in some ways, but sometimes in my dreams, I'll hear the lock of the door click. The sound is a scar, a reminder of what I left behind. I think about Max and Lily, wondering what kind of adults they grow up to be. I pray they're free, but I fear they're still locked in that house. In silence, their only companion. Story number 5. The Whispering Geishas. The bedroom was a shrine to another time, but its beauty hid a curse. My name's Elena. A kid, growing up in a house where my mother's passion for antiques shaped our world. My parents had an authentic Japanese motif for their bedroom. The air was heavy with secrets, and I was too young to see them. My mom was an interior designer and spent all of her free time antiquing for different pieces. Her treasures were art, but some held more than history. At some point, my mother came home with 2 beautiful antique lamps. The lamps were more than objects. They were alive. The lamps were carved and painted porcelain. Their delicate forms glowed softly, but their gaze was cold. The main design on the lamps was a geisha woman holding a fan. Each geisha stared, her fan a shield, her eyes a trap. Each lamp had one, but each geisha was slightly different. They stood sentinel in the room, watching us. They were very delicate, highly detailed, and very beautiful. My sister called them the Sisters, a name that would haunt us. The night it began, the house felt wrong. My sister, who also was very young at the time, dubbed them the Sisters. Lupita's voice was bright, but the lamps dimmed her light. This story actually centers around my sister, Lupita. She was fearless. Until that night, our parents were out to dinner with friends. The house was ours, but it wasn't empty. They called in our babysitter, Doris. Doris was kind, but unprepared for what waited. The bedroom was our haven, until it wasn't. At the time, the TV channels in our den were restricted, but our parents could all the cable channels in their bedroom. We gathered there, drawn to forbidden thrills. We all would hang out there when they weren't home. The screen flickered with horror, but the real terror was closer. We were all watching something R-rated and scary. Lupita stayed, her eyes wide, alone with the shadows. My sister stayed up with Doris to watch the rest of the movie. The lamps awoke, and the night turned cold. Doris was dozing off, and she was left to watch the scary movie by herself. Lupita's gaze drifted, seeking escape, trying not to look at the screen during a particularly scary part. Lupita looked towards one of the lamps. The geishas stirred, their fans trembling. Glancing at it quickly, she said it looked like something on the lamp moved. Her heart stopped as they moved again. She saw something was moving on both lamps. The sisters were no longer still. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. The geishas danced, their fans fluttering like wings. The geisha on the lamps were moving and fluttering their fans. Their voices were a soft, chilling chorus. While whispering and giggling at her and each other, Lupita's scream shattered the night. Petrified in total disbelief, Lupita screamed. Doris jolted awake, her eyes catching the impossible. Doris no doubt must have assumed the house was on fire. The truth was fleeting, but undeniable. My sister pointed to the lamps. Doris saw it. A flicker of movement, then stillness. Doris, still a bit disoriented, for a second saw the geisha move their fans back into position. She soothed Lupita, denying the horror. She calmed my sister down, telling her it was only her imagination. But the lie couldn't hold after putting my sister to bed. Doris waited in the den for my parents to get home. She fled from us, her silence a confession. The lamp's curse lingered. She never mentioned anything about the lamps. Doris vanished from our lives. Anytime my mother called her after, she said she was busy. Years later, her truth surfaced. I ran into Doris. She asked about our home, our lives. She asked how everyone was doing and if we still lived there. I told her of the fire that took everything. My mother had a fire shortly after we moved and lost almost everything. Her eyes darkened as she spoke. She said, "You're not going to believe this, but the last night I was there, something really strange happened." Satz, the past whispered through her words. When I was the only one left awake, I kept hearing voices coming from your parents' room. She'd thought it was a prank until it wasn't. I thought it was your sister pretending to sleep and pranking me. Lupita's sleep was deep, unbroken. When I realized Lupita was fully asleep, I started to get scared. The voices were real, tied to the lamps. I know what Lupita saw. Doris saw them move, their fans alive. She said they moved, and I saw it too. The house was gone, but the sister's shadow remained. My parents got divorced. The lamps followed my mother to her new home. My mother sold the house. She built a sanctuary in the country. She transported all of her beloved pieces there. But the sisters brought ruin. A freak fire broke out, and the house and everything in it burnt to the ground. The flames were unnatural, consuming all. The firefighters said they never saw a fire that burnt so hot. My mother found freedom in the ashes. Although the fire was devastating, in many ways it was also liberating. The lamps were gone, but their whispers haunt me still. I searched X for tales of cursed antiques, finding stories of objects that carry spirits, of fires that cleanse. Some things aren't meant to be owned, and the sisters were one of them. Story number 6. The Night at the Gothic Gates. The mansion stood like a forgotten relic, its spires piercing the night sky. I worked as a living babysitter for a wealthy, mostly absent man. The job was a lifeline, a quiet escape from the world's chaos. A job that sounded simple on paper, but turned out to be the weirdest experience of my life. The estate was a labyrinth of secrets, its grandeur masking neglect. He owned this massive estate just outside of town. Gothic architecture, big ironing gates, 3 stories tall with a garage that could fit a dozen cars. The iron gates loomed a barrier between the world and this strange outpost. The man himself barely showed up, maybe once every few months. His absence was a shadow, his presence a rare intrusion. He lived in France with his wife. The mansion was a ghost, kept alive for reasons I couldn't fathom. The mansion was more like a forgotten outpost, a place he kept for reasons that probably made sense only to him. Its halls echoed with emptiness, its rooms frozen in time. My job was to watch his daughter. She was my anchor, a quiet light in the gloom. She was quiet, polite, and honestly easy to care for. Her presence made the job bearable, her calm a contrast to the house's unease. Most of the time, she stayed in her room reading or playing with antique toys that looked like they belonged in a museum. The house was a paradox, opulent yet abandoned, and I slept in a small guest room down the hall, and we mostly had the run of the house to ourselves. The guest room was my haven, a small claim in a vast domain. That was the problem. The house was strange. Its strangeness was a weight pressing against my senses. It was packed with expensive things, but none of them were cared for. Crystal and silver lay scattered, treasures treated like trash. These rooms were filled with crystal bowls, silver trays, but goblets, all dumped into piles like someone had been preparing for a garage sale and forgot to actually do it. The neglect was eerie. A fortune left to decay, dust covered everything. The dining room was a shrine to chaos. I remember once stepping into what looked like a formal dining room only to find thousands of dollars worth of antique tableware lying in jumbled heaps. The silverware gleamed dully, a hoard untouched by care. It felt more like a dragon's hoard than someone's home. The house was a riddle, its purpose lost to time. But the real horror came one day in the night. The night began innocently, a routine evening after a long day. You see, me and this girl had just been playing, and it was about time to put her to sleep. Her laughter was a fleeting joy, soon replaced by the house's silence. I did just that when I heard what sounded like someone driving down the driveway, which was odd in itself, as we hardly ever had visitors. The sound was a jolt, alien in the quiet. The guy came about every 3 months, so I assumed it wasn't him because he'd only left about 3 weeks ago. His absence was recent, making the noise suspicious. So I do the due diligence and look out the window anyway and don't notice the car. The driveway was dark, the vehicle a stranger. It definitely isn't one of his lavish ones. It's quite a beat-up old one. The car was a relic, its rusty red hue dull in the moonlight, and as it was already quite dark, I only noticed that it was like a rusty red color, and it wasn't shiny like a normal car. So it must have been quite old. Its age was a warning, out of place in this opulent world. I told her to just wait in her room and lock the door, and that I was going to go down and ask who it was. The house felt alive, its shadows watching. I make my way down the stairs and look through the peephole of the door, but no one comes out the car. The car idled, its driver hidden. The car kind of just drives away. The retreat was unsettling, a false reprieve. I feel a bit weirded out, and even if I would have messaged the guy on my phone, he usually would take his sweet time to reply. His silence was a constant, unreliable as ever. But I messaged him anyway and asked him what to do. The message was a plea sent into the void. I didn't even get a reply that day. The routine resumed, but unease lingered. Anyway, I go back upstairs and tend to the girl, read her a story, put her to sleep, and start my usual routine of going down the stairs, turning on the TV in the living room, and watching TV for the next 2 hours before I go upstairs and pass up myself. The TV's glow was a comfort, a shield against the dark. It had been a particularly grueling day. The day's demands had drained me. Her club's a marathon of responsibility. The girl had a lot of after-school clubs, and of course, I was the one who had to make sure she got there, did a hit, and came home properly. Exhaustion weighed heavy, my body aching, so I was pretty spent. The night betrayed me. Its calm, a lie. About an hour after watching something on the TV, I'm asleep. And that's when I hear a kind of hammering at the back door. The sound was a thunderclap, ripping me from sleep. I nearly jumped out my skin. My heart raced, fear flooding my veins. The light over there was turned off. The darkness was a barrier, hiding the threat. So I leave the light on where I am and start making my way slowly in the darkness, guided only by the outside moonlight in the windows to see where this person is who's knocking at the back door. Each step was cautious, the house a maze of shadows. The pounding starts again, and then a shatter. The glass broke, and the night invaded. They broke the glass, and then I hear a door swing open. The sound was a violation. The house breached. That's when I freeze. Terror rooted me, my mind racing. What the hell is going to happen now? What are they here for? The questions were a storm, unanswered. I hear two men talking and then making haste towards the room with all the garage sale items, as I like to call it. Their voices were low, urgent, drawn to the hoard. The guy must have had thousands upon thousands of pounds worth of stuff there. The room was a treasure trove, ripe for plunder, and I honestly have no idea what he wanted to do with it. The intruders were a threat, their intent unknown, but I didn't want to make my business to find out what these guys would do to me if they were to see me. Survival was my focus, stealth my ally. So, as quickly as I can, I make my way back to the room where I've been watching TV. The living room was a trap, exposed. Turned off the light and grabbed my phone. The phone was my lifeline, a chance for help. I needed to find somewhere where I could call 999 and get the police here. The call was urgent, time slipping away. But that meant going up the stairs, and the stairs were wooden and had a habit of creaking in most places. The stairs were a gauntlet, each step a risk. So I sent up a prayer to anyone who was listening and started making my way up the stairs. My heart pounded. Each creak a betrayal. I thought if I only walked on the edges, maybe it wouldn't creak. The edges were my hope, a fragile strategy. When I'm about 2/3 up, I see the little girl is looking down, probably awoken from the noise. Her face was a beacon, innocent and unaware. She doesn't realize that there's something creepy going on and calls out loud, "What's going on?" Her voice was a siren, shattering the silence. And then all noise in the house stops. The moment was a knife, cutting through time. My eyes widened. Fear seized me. Her voice a beacon for danger. She sort of grasps comprehension in that moment, and I tell her to run. My voice was urgent, a command born of panic. Right as I'm bolting up the stairs, I turn around because I hear the two guys have now made their way out and are running up the stairs towards us. Their footsteps were thunder, closing the distance. One of them is holding something heavy in their hand. like a crowbar or a pipe. The weapon gleamed dully, a promise of violence. I don't really remember. I just knew that a whack on the head from that would probably be fatal. The room was our sanctuary, a fragile fortress. Thankfully, her door is nearby. We rush in and lock it. The lock clicked, a small victory. And then I grab her wardrobe and start pushing it towards the door. The wardrobe was heavy, my strength fueled by fear. I just pray that it holds. The barricade was our shield, precarious but vital. We run into her bathroom and hide in the bath with the curtain drawn, knowing full well that it won't provide any real coverage if those guys break in. The curtain was a lie, flimsy and useless. But I take a moment to start calling the police. The call was a lifeline, a thread of hope. They tell me they'll be there in about 50 minutes because, of course, this guy lives quite rurally and we just lie there huddled. The wait was agony, each second an eternity. I can't explain the true fear you feel in those moments, knowing that at any moment some violent psycho can run into the room, swing something in your head, and remove you from this world permanently. The fear was visceral, a living thing. Those moments holding her were some of the tensest and most frightening of my life. Her small body trembled against mine, her trust my burden. Thankfully, the police made it even faster. The sirens were salvation. A hymn in the night? Turns out a patrol vehicle wasn't far. Their speed was a miracle, unexpected. And then we heard the sirens coming down the driveway. The sound was a beacon, driving back the dark. That's when we heard the men running down the stairs as fast as they could and fleeing the property. Their retreat was chaotic, their greed undone. The police did eventually catch them. Justice was swift. The thieves apprehended. They were just looking for something to steal and thought the house would be empty. The aftermath was a blur. The house tainted. I'm not sure how they didn't notice the light on in the downstairs room. Their oversight was our salvation, a careless mistake. Or maybe they assumed because it was so quiet that it was on a timer or something undone on purpose. Their assumptions were our shield, flawed but effective. Honestly, I never found out. The details were irrelevant. The danger passed. Thankfully for the girl, the dad decided it would be time to bring her over to France, and I was let go. Her departure was a relief, her safety assured. Honestly, I was going to quit shortly after. But because of the girl and our attachment, I found it really hard to say goodbye. The mansion was a memory, a scar I carried. It's been a number of years now. I hope she's doing well. I never did find out what happened to that house, but I'm in no hurry to find out. The girl was a light, her future a hope I held close. I searched X for stories of Gothic estates, finding tales of neglected mansions plagued by thieves and ghosts. Some spoke of rural break-ins, others of houses that seemed to invite chaos. The estate's hoard was a magnet, its isolation a lure. I moved on, finding work closer to town, but the night at the Gothic gates lingered, a reminder of fear and resilience, etched into my soul. Story number 7, The Predator with the Cheap Wine. The mansion at the end of the cul-de-sac is a fortress of wealth, but it feels like a cage. I'm 16, navigating the world of babysitting for rich families, their homes gleaming with excess. When I was teen, I babysat for a lot of wealthy families in the area. This house is different, cold, too big, too quiet. They lived in a huge cold house at the end of a winding cul-de-sac. The air is heavy, like it's holding a secret. The parents had 3 kids under the age of 10, which were all surprisingly polite. The dad's smile doesn't reach his eyes. He's always there, a fixture in his tailored suits, clutching his glass of red wine. He was in his mid-40s, well-dressed, well-groomed, and always had a glass of red wine in his hand. It's Costco wine, cheap for a man who could afford anything. This guy had about enough money to drink anything in the world, and he chose the bulk stuff from Costco. He talks about it like it's a philosophy. He even talked about it how it was underrated and how people didn't appreciate things that looked average. His words linger, unsettling, like a warning I can't yet read. The house watches me. They started requesting me more often and always last minute. The calls come late, urgent, pulling me into their world. Sometimes I'd show up and the cook and nanny would be gone for the evening, which meant I was suddenly responsible for everything. I feed the kids, manage bedtimes, and feel eyes on my back. Every time I arrived, the dad would insist I eat something. He pushes plates at me, his voice too smooth. "The chef made too much," he'd say, even when I knew they were out for the night. "Eat, please, you're so thin." He'd press a plate into my hands and say, "Eat, please, you're so thin." His generosity is a trap. He tried to give me money double my rate, triple once. The cash feels dirty. His tone too eager. I rarely attempted it. I don't know why. But my gut screams to keep my distance. Something about his tone felt off. The mom is kind but distant, her eyes avoiding mine. The mom was quiet, a little tense, but kind. The kids are sweet, but the house is wrong. This wasn't generosity, it was bait. He's not what he seems. One night, they asked me to stay late for a dinner party. They had a dinner party and asked if I could stay late. I agreed, needing the money I got there around 600 p.m. And the cook told me the parents would be home late, maybe midnight. The kids are fine, but the youngest wakes from a nightmare at around 10:00 p.m. The youngest had a nightmare. I soothe her, then hear the front door. I heard the front door open and figured the parents were back early. I head downstairs, expecting both parents. Only the dad was home. He's waiting. He was in the kitchen, drinking his usual Costco wine, leaning against the island. His eyes are sharp, predatory. The look in his eyes wasn't the relaxed, half-drunk expression I was used to. He speaks, his voice too calm. "You're a good girl, smart and responsible." He said, he mumbled a reply. Reaching for my bag, I nodded, bumbled something polite back, and turned to grab my bag from the couch. Then he offers me wine. Then he said, "Have you ever had wine before? I'm 16. I remind him, my voice tight. I reminded him, trying to keep my voice neutral. He pours a glass, sliding it toward me. He poured another glass and slid it across the counter towards me. "Just a sip, I won't tell, I promise." "Just a sip, I won't tell, I promise." I'm not safe. I backed away and said I needed to check on the kids. My heart pounds as I flee upstairs. He didn't move, just watched me walk upstairs like a damn hawk. I locked myself in the oldest kid's room, trembling. I locked the door to the oldest kid's room and sat on the floor for a while, heart pounding. After a while, I peek out. After maybe 20 minutes, I peeked into the hallway. The house is silent, but it's a lie. Quiet, no sound from the downstairs. I creeped to the front door, finding it dead-bolted. I started turning the knob slowly, trying not to make noise. He's behind me. That's when I heard him behind me looking for something. He's in the hallway, wine glass in hand, smiling. He was standing in the shadow of the hallway, still holding the wine glass and watching me with that creepy little smile. I lie, my voice shaking. I lied and said I thought I heard a dog outside. They don't have a dog. They didn't have a dog. He steps closer, too close. He stepped closer. You should stay the night. There's a guest room. It's safer, you know, for girls like you. You should stay the night. There's a guest room. It's safer, you know, for girls like you. I have to escape. My mouth went dry. I forced a lie. I forced a laugh and said, Actually, my dad's on his way. He hates it when I'm late." His face shifts, a flicker of doubt. His face twitched just slightly, and he stepped back. I unlocked the door, my hands shaking. I took the opportunity to unlock the door and walked out as calmly as I could. I run, calling my mom from a neighbor's driveway. As soon as I hit the sidewalk, I ran to the end of the block and called my mom from a neighbor's driveway. I don't tell her everything, just enough. I didn't tell her everything, just that the dad was acting weird and I didn't feel safe. They vanish, but not the fear. The mom calls, her voice breaking. The next day, the mom called and left me a voicemail saying she was sorry if things got strange and that they wouldn't need a sitter anymore. They move away soon after. A year later, I learned they moved out of state. I find nothing about him online, like he never existed. I've never been able to find him online. No LinkedIn, no Facebook, no anything. Then weeks later, I hear a rumor, a note found in their guest room, scrawled with, "She's next." Was it meant for me? Sometimes I still think about how insistent he was. The food, the wine, the money, and how it didn't feel like the first time he tried that line. His voice haunts me. "You're a good girl, smart, responsible." I lock my doors now, check the shadows. What if he's still out there, pouring his cheap wine, waiting? Story number 8, The Cartridge Thief in the Living Room. The living room was my sanctuary, but that day, it hid a thief in plain sight. I was around 12 years old when one of the weirdest things ever happened right in my own living room. My babysitter, a girl I trusted, was watching me, but she was watching my games too. Her silence wasn't boredom, it was a plan. I had no idea how close I was to losing my treasures. My parents came home early, and the air shifted, heavy with suspicion. As soon as they walked through the front door, my mom got this suspicious look. The coffee table, once cluttered with my favorite NES cartridges, was empty. A couple of my favorite cartridges, Ninja Garden and Double Dragon, had been sitting on the coffee table earlier that day, and now they were gone. My mom's gaze locked on the babysitter, and I knew something was wrong. The truth was about to unravel. The babysitter's calm cracked when my dad mentioned the hidden camera. That's when my dad said he was going to check the living room camera. She went pale, her arms tightening like a shield. The footage played, and there she was, stealing my games, stuffing them into her clothes like a smuggler. She waited until I left the room, looked around like she was about to commit a felony, and grabbed a few games and stuffed them into her clothes. Her secret was exposed, and she couldn't hide anymore. She denied everything, but her lie fell apart with a single sound, and no exaggeration, a plastic clatter hit the floor. Ninja Garden had literally slipped down her pant leg and landed at her feet. The room froze. The cartridge, a silent accuser at her feet. Her face burned red, but she couldn't run from the truth. My mom's voice was calm, but it cut like a knife. In the back room, she unraveled, pulling games from places no one would suspect. She started pulling up Nest cartridges out from under her shirt, the waistband of her pants, and even tucked under the strap of her bra on her back. It was like she'd turned herself into a walking vault. My mom held the stack, her patience a warning, and sent her away. The babysitter left, a thief unmasked, and we never saw her again. I was just a kid, lost in my world of Lego and NES games, when the strangest thing unfolded in my own home. My parents had gone out for a few hours and left me with our usual babysitter, a girl from a few streets over who was around. She was familiar, a quiet presence who'd watched me before. She'd watched me a few times before. She wasn't especially talkative, mostly kept to herself, but she'd sit nearby while I played Ness and sometimes asked what the games were about. I thought she was just passing time. Her questions about Ninja Garden and Double Dragon mere small talk. I figured she was just bored. I was in my room piecing together a Lego fortress. When the front door opened, my parents were back, sooner than expected, and the mood shifted instantly. She glanced over at the entertainment center, then at the babysitter, who was now stiffly sitting on the couch, arms folded tight over her chest like she was cold. Mom's eyes narrowed, scanning the coffee table where my games had been. "Where are all the games that were out there earlier?" my mom asked. Her voice was steady, but I knew that tone. It meant trouble. The babysitter squirmed, her answer weak. The babysitter shifted a little. "Oh, I don't know. Maybe he put them away," she said, glancing towards me. I shook my head, confused. "No, I never touched them. I always left my games out, a habit my parents tolerated." Dad didn't hesitate. Heading for the camcorder he'd set up after a break-in. He had installed a small camcorder up high in the living room after a minor break-in a few months earlier, and it was recording everything in the main area. The babysitter's face drained of color, her arms tightening further. We gathered around the TV as Dad fast-forwarded, the grainy footage revealing her crime. He fast-forwarded through a few hours of footage, and there it was, clear as day. She'd waited for me to leave, her eyes darting, then grabbed the cartridges, hiding them in her clothes with practiced ease. I remember watching the footage in disbelief, trying to figure out why she was even putting them there. Mom turned, her voice sharp but controlled. My mom turned to her and asked, "Is there something you'd like to tell us?" The babysitter shook her head, defiant. She shook her head furiously. I didn't take anything. But then it happened. A sound broke the tension, a plastic cartridge hitting the floor. Ninja Garden lay at her feet, a traitor to her lie. The silence was deafening. 5 seconds of shock before Mom spoke. There was a full 5 seconds of stunned silence, and then my mom just said, "Come with me." Mom led her to the back room, the door closing with a soft click. She led the babysitter into one of the back rooms and closed the door. I strained to hear, catching Mom's firm, measured tone, demanding the truth. The babysitter caved, her defiance crumbling as she revealed her stash. One by one, she pulled out cartridges under her shirt, in her waistband, even hidden against her back. It was surreal, like watching a smuggler unload contraband. She'd planned it, her body a map of hiding spots for my games. Mom emerged, a stack of cartridges in her hands, her face a mix of anger and disbelief. When they came back out, Mom had all the games stacked in her hands. The babysitter stood head down, her cheeks flushed with shame. The babysitter was red-faced and avoiding everyone's eyes. Mom didn't raise her voice, didn't call the police, just delivered her verdict. My mom calmly told her that she wouldn't be paid and needed to leave immediately. The girl left without a word, the door closing behind her like a final judgment. She walked out the front door without a word, and we never saw her again. I sat there, stunned, trying to process it all. Why steal games? Was she selling them, collecting them, or just acting on impulse? The cartridges were back, but the betrayal lingered. A crack in the safety of home. My parents tightened security. The camcorder now a permanent fixture. I stopped leaving games out, my trust in babysitters shattered. The girl's name faded, but her actions didn't. She turned a simple afternoon into a story I'd never forget. Years later, I wonder about her. What drove her to such a bold, bizarre theft? The footage replays in my mind, her quick hands, her nervous glances. She wasn't just a babysitter, she was a thief, her quiet demeanor a mask. I've told the story countless times, each retelling met with laughter or disbelief. But for me, it's a reminder. Even in your own home, trust can be a fragile thing. The living room is still there, the coffee table too, but it's never felt the same. Story number 9, the Salient Estate. The estate wasn't just isolated. It was a world apart, nestled in the mountains near Kuisawa, Japan. Its ancient cedar beams and paper-thin shoji doors hid secrets heavier than the fog that clung to the peaks. Something lived in those walls, and it wasn't the children we were meant to care for. I had just finished college and was looking for a way to stay abroad a little longer before figuring out the next steps in life. Elise, a young American, took a job through a dubious agency. Lured by high pay and free housing, I ended up landing a job through a sketchy-looking but legit agency that placed foreign women as babysitters for wealthy families. But the house she entered wasn't a home. It was a stage for something sinister. I was placed with a man called Mr. Okihara who lived alone, allegedly with his children in a massive estate up in the mountains near Kusawa. The mansion was a relic, its beauty masking an unsettling stillness. The house was beautiful. Traditional Japanese architecture, shoji doors, cedar floors, and that eerie atmosphere that comes with old money and isolation. Elise arrived to find 7 other foreign girls, all her age, all equally confused. When I arrived, I realized I wasn't the only one. There were 7 other girls living there too, all foreign and all around my age, and all confused about what we were doing there. They wore identical uniforms, stripped of their names and given numbers. Hers was 4. We each had our own uniform. Identical navy blue dresses with little white bows and black flats. Our names weren't used. We were numbered. I was 4. No children ever appeared. Only their echoes haunted the halls. No one saw the kids ever. We just heard them. The days were filled with hollow tasks, polishing spotless wood, arranging toys no one touched. Our days were filled with pointless chores, polishing furniture that wasn't dusty, prepping food that someone else had cooked, tidying playrooms no one had used. Footsteps pattered upstairs. Faint cries slipped through locked doors, but the second floor was forbidden. Once in a while, we'd hear footsteps upstairs, the sound of small feet running down the hallway or soft crying behind locked doors. But no one was allowed on the second floor. Each night, a bell signaled a ritual that chilled Elise's blood. At exactly 8:30 p.m. every evening, a bell rang throughout the house. They gathered in silence, listening to Mr. Okahara's monotonous recitations by the fireplace. That was our cue to gather in the drawing room and sit in complete silence while Mr. Okahara stood in front of the fireplace and recited the events of that day. His words weren't for them, they were for something else. He never spoke to us, only at us. Disrupting the ritual was unthinkable. We weren't allowed to interrupt or ask questions. We just had to sit, hands on lap, back straight, and listen. A girl who sneezed was gone the next day, her absence unexplained. The first time someone sneezed during his story, he stopped mid-sentence and stared at us for what felt like a full minute. Then he started over from the very beginning, and the girl who sneezed left the next day, and we never saw her again. At midnight, another bell brought darkness. The power cut to their wing. At midnight, sharp, a second bell rang. That meant lights out, and not just going to sleep. The power to our entire wing was automatically cut. Phones were useless. No signal, no Wi-Fi, only a faint connection in the bathroom. Phones didn't work in our rooms. There was no signal, no Wi-Fi, and we all shared one bathroom near the laundry room where sometimes we could get a weak connection. The crying came at night, a chorus of unseen children. About 2 weeks in, I started hearing crying in the middle of the night. Not one voice, but several, and sometimes in sync. Elise checked her roommates, all were present. I thought maybe it was one of the other girls, but they were all accounted for. One night, her door stood ajar, though she'd locked it tight. So, one night I woke up and noticed my door was slightly ajar. That was weird. I always locked it. Footsteps echoed from above, closer now, pulling her toward the forbidden floor. I got up to close it when I heard something upstairs. The stairs were a descent into the unknown. Cold and unforgiving, the stairs were really steep and cold. Elise followed the crying, drawn to a faint light under a second-floor door. And as I reached the top, I saw a faint light spilling out from under a door at the end of the hallway. The voices were childlike, but wrong, layered with something ancient. The crying was coming from multiple voices, and they were children, or at least that's what it sounded like. She reached for the door, and it flew open, revealing Mr. Okahara's expressionless face. I reached out to touch the door, and it opened fast, like someone had yanked it from the inside. Mr. Okahara stood there in the doorway, calm and expressionless. Behind him, a nursery of empty cribs, and one with a long, thin shape beneath a blanket. Moving behind him, I saw what looked like an old nursery. Cribs lined the walls, some empty, some not. And I swear to God I saw something move under a blanket, but it wasn't shaped like a kid. It was long and thin. He didn't speak, only pointed her back downstairs. I didn't say a word, neither did he. He just raised one finger and pointed back down the stairs. Elise fled at dawn, barefoot, abandoning her belongings. I packed at first light, took only what I could carry, left my shoes, and ran barefoot to the nearest train station and never returned. The agency's calls went unanswered, their secrets left behind. The agency tried to contact me, but I ignored everything. She found refuge with a friend in Nagano, then left Japan for good. I got a new friend and stayed with a friend in Nagano, and eventually flew home, but the estate's shadow followed her. A question without an answer. But I still wonder what the hell was happening in that house. Elise's escape didn't erase the estate's grip on her mind. Those cries, those shapes in the cribs, haunted her dreams. She researched Kuisawa, uncovering whispers of missing au pairs, girls who'd worked for wealthy families and vanished. Old forums mentioned the Okihara estate, tied to rituals and children who were never born. Was Mr. Okihara serving a family or something else entirely? She moved back home, installing cameras and checking locks nightly. One night, she woke to a faint tapping, like small feet on wood, gone when she checked the feed. She joined a support group for expats, sharing her story to warn others. Some had heard of similar estates, isolated, ruled by strange customs, housing things that weren't human. The crying wasn't children, it was a lure, a trap for the living. Then came the package, no sender, with a navy blue ribbon inside. Tied to it was a note in Japanese, "For." Elise burned it, but the memory of the cribs lingered. Was the estate still calling her back, or had it never let her go? She avoided old houses, kept her doors barred, but the silence of her new life felt too much like the estate's. Something was still watching, waiting for her to listen again. Story number 10, The Trap at the Terminal. You're Steen, alone in a foreign airport, waiting for a family you've never met. The crowd thins, but no one comes for you until a stranger approaches, smiling too wide, knowing your name. Why is she here, not the woman you trusted? Her words are kind, but her eyes are sharp, and your gut screams to run. Every second feels like a test. One wrong move, and you might vanish, swallowed by a plant you never saw coming. This isn't just a mix-up. It's a brush with danger so real. It chills you years later. A trap you barely escaped. You trusted your instincts, but what if you hadn't? Would you still be here to tell the tale? The dream of working as an au pair felt like an adventure, a chance to travel and care for kids in a new country. I wanted to work as an au pair, which is a kind of permanent babysitter arrangement. And the only place close to me that I could go as a 7-year-old was England. I found a family online, a mother with 2 children, a boy and a girl, who seemed perfect. So, I found this family, a mother with 2 kids, boy and a girl. Our messages were warm, her voice kind, and she was eager to have me join them. I messaged them and talked to the mother, and she seemed very interested and very nice. We agreed on a date for my arrival and to pack my bags, excitement outweighing my nerves. We set up a date for me to go, and that was that. But dreams can hide nightmares. At the airport, I scanned the crowd, expecting a familiar face, or at least the mother I'd spoken to. When I got to the airport, I was very confused that they weren't there to collect me. No one was there. I messaged the mother and asked her where she was and if it would be long for them to pick me up. She replied quickly, saying she was stuck in traffic and would arrive soon. She told me she was on her way and just stuck in traffic, and I thought that was fair. I waited at the exit as instructed, clutching my phone. She told me to go to the exit and wait. Something felt off, but I couldn't place it. She texted again, saying she was in a blue car. Then, not long after, she told me she was there and that she was in a blue car. I searched the lot, but no blue cars stood out. I was looking around very confused since I couldn't really see any blue cars there. Then I saw it, a blue sedan, and a woman stepped out, but not the one I'd expected. When I finally found it, some other woman than the one I'd been talking to walked out of the car and towards me. As our eyes met, my phone buzzed with a long message from the mother. The instant I made eye contact with this other woman, I got a long text from the woman that I was supposed to work for. She explained her husband had returned unexpectedly, opposed to an au pair, and instead of canceling, she'd passed me to a friend who needed help, where it basically said her husband had come home from the country he worked in and that they had fought because he didn't want an au pair in the house. And for some reason, she didn't want to tell me that. So she just gave me to a good friend who needed one. Why hadn't she told me sooner? Anyway, I was very confused. It was a bit much, and I was quite scared. The timing was too perfect, as if someone had orchestrated it. It all seemed very weird, as if someone was watching me and had been waiting for the right moment to send the text. The woman approached, all smiles, but her urgency set my nerves on edge. The woman seemed very friendly, but was hurrying and taking my things and putting them in her car while talking to me, non-confrontational by nature. I hesitated, unsure how to react as she loaded my bags into her car. I'm a bit nervous and non-confrontational by nature, so I didn't really know what to do or say other than just to follow her in what she was doing. She urged us to leave, citing her parking spot. When it was all done, she told me that we should get going. I voiced my discomfort, my voice shaking, and I told her I wasn't really feeling comfortable with all of it. She nodded, sympathetic, but insisted she needed help with her own kids and we had to move quickly. She told me that she understood, but she really needed the help and also had 2 children at home, but that we had to move fast because of the place she was parked. Reluctantly, I got in the car, my instincts screaming. So we got in the car and started driving out of the airport pickup spot. This was wrong. As we pulled away, I found my voice, demanding to stay at the airport. The second we started moving, I told her I was very uncomfortable with this and really wanted to get out and stay in the airport. She seemed frustrated, claiming she couldn't stop there or risk a fine, but promised to let me out soon. She seemed a bit upset by this and told me that she could drop me off, but that she has to get out of where we were because she could get a ticket for letting me out there or something. Was that even true? Which I didn't know if it was true or not. We drove a short distance within the airport grounds, and she stopped, allowing me to call my parents. We drove for a few minutes still on the airport ground, and we stopped a bit of early so that I could call my parents, sobbing. I explained everything, noticing her speaking to someone, possibly the mothers, in a language I didn't understand. I talked to them, sobbing the whole time, and I noticed that while I was talking to them, the woman inside her car began talking to a woman, the one I had been speaking to. I presume I didn't understand the language they were speaking, so I can't say what they were talking about. Back in the car, I insisted on being let out. When I was done talking, I got into the car again and told her that I really wanted her to let me out. She pushed, offering to drop me in town or at a mall, but I refused, demanding the airport. And she kept asking me if I wasn't sure I didn't want to go into town with her if I didn't want her to drop me off by the shopping center. I, of course, told her no, that I really wanted to be let out by the airport. She complied, and I returned to safety. She did, thankfully, and I went inside and spoke with my parents. But the danger wasn't over. Strange voicemails followed, cryptic and in an unknown language, from her and others. After this happened, I got some really weird voice memos from her and 2 other people. I couldn't understand them, but it was strange. My parents tried contacting her, only to be blocked. My parents also tried contacting her, and she blocked both of them. Who was she really? Au pairs often face exploitation, so contracts are crucial for safety. If you don't know what, a lot of au pairs are being treated very poorly. So, for us to feel safe and secure and sure that we weren't going to get cheated out of paying or working more than we were supposed to, we have to sign a contract. I discovered hers was fake, the address non-existent. Later on, I found out the contract she had sent was fake and not binding. Not to mention her address was bogus. Worse, the city was a known hub for human trafficking. I later found out the city I'd flown into and was supposed to be living in was a hot spot for human trafficking. I'd been inches from disaster. I didn't know this until later. There was a lot of sketchy stuff going on that whole time. My gut had saved me. A warning I'd never ignore again. My gut was screaming at me that this was a bad situation. And I'm so glad I listened, because I'm quite sure that had I not listened, I would have been human trafficked, and I wouldn't be here to share this story with you today. The aftermath lingered. I avoided au pair work, shaken by how close I'd come to vanishing. What had they planned? The voicemails haunted me, their tone urgent, almost threatening. I played them for a friend fluent in multiple languages, but even she couldn't identify the words, only noting their intensity. Were they instructions? A warning? My parents reported the incident, but with no real leads. It went nowhere. I later found online forums where others shared similar stories, fake job offers, strangers at airports, promises that unraveled. How many hadn't escaped? The mother's profile vanished, her number disconnected, as if she'd never existed. I wondered if she was real or just a lure in a larger scheme. Had she watched me from afar, timing that text? Years later, I traveled again, but never alone, always checking details obsessively. That day changed me. The airport, once a place of excitement, now felt like a trap waiting to spring. I shared my story with a few friends, one of whom had a cousin who disappeared after a similar job offer abroad. Was it connected? The city's reputation for trafficking gnawed at me, a reminder of the darkness hiding in plain sight. Some traps are invisible until they close. Story number 11. The Midnight Watcher. The house was too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes your skin crawl. I'd been a pretty regular Lanny for an amazing family for the past 4 years. The kind of family that felt like home, their warmth, a shield against the world. But tonight, something was off. A shadow lurking in the corners of my mind. The baby monitor's green light blinked like an unblinking eye, watching, waiting. I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. The little boy's room was a fortress of toys and dreams. They're genuinely great people, kind and respectful, and always treated me like part of the family. The little boy I care for is sweet and clever with a wild imagination that makes watching him feel more like hanging out with a tiny whirlwind of personality rather than doing a job. But his stories lately were darker. Tales of a lady in the door who watched him sleep. His words clung to me, a warning I couldn't ignore. The parents' faces told a story of their own. One weekend morning, I came in and the mom asked me if she could show me something. Her eyes were hollow, shadowed by sleepless nights. Her voice tight with something beyond worry, fear. She held her phone like it was a loaded gun, her fingers trembling. She looked, well, not mad, but more like she hadn't slept in days, more worried and disturbed. The truth was about to unravel, and it would change everything. The screen flickered to life, and my world tilted. She pulled up a saved video clip on the monitor app, and what I saw left me cold. The footage was grainy, but the horror was clear. The little guy was sitting on the floor with some toys when the nanny came in and told him it was time to clean up. He said very calmly and with zero attitude, "Mommy said, I don't have to do that." Then the nanny's face twisted, her eyes burning with something not quite human. Her voice was a blade, cutting through the room. Then she snapped. She said in this sharp, almost venomous tone, "Well, it doesn't matter anymore. Mommy's a cow." Then grabbed him by the back of his shirt and dragged him out of the room like a sack of laundry. The boy's small body jerked, his toys scattering like leaves in a storm. I gasped, my hand over my mouth as the mother's voice broke, whispering, "There's more." The footage shifted. A new clip, this one at midnight. There's only one baby monitor in the house, and it's in the little dude's room. It has audio and video, and the parents usually check in occasionally, especially if he's playing quietly for a while or if someone new is watching him. But this wasn't a routine check. Apparently, they had started checking the cameras more often because their son had been saying weird things, not just about being scared or not wanting to be alone, but about how the nanny would come into his room at night. The screen showed the boy asleep, his chest rising and falling softly. Then a shadow moved. They hadn't believed it at first because the nanny wasn't even supposed to be there after dinner. But one night, just before they were planning to let her go, they checked the monitor around midnight. The door creaked open, and there she was. She was in his room, just standing in the doorway for 2 solid minutes, watching him sleep. Her silhouette was a statue, unmoving, her eyes glinting in the dark. Then she quietly shut the door and walked out. My stomach churned, a sick dread pooling inside me. The parents had no idea she had a key. She'd made a copy of the house keys without asking and had been letting herself in late at night just watching him. The mother's voice trembled as she explained how they'd found the key in her bag, a duplicate they'd never authorized. When the mom showed me that clip, I felt my heart drop to my stomach. The nanny's face in the footage wasn't just calm. It was hungry, like she was studying him, waiting for something to break. They confronted her the next morning. The father had called her in, his voice steady but cold. She denied it, obviously, until they mentioned the footage, and she got angry, like furious, screamed about how they didn't understand what the boy really needed and had security escort her, and changed all the locks that same day. Her rage was a mask, hiding something deeper, something that made my skin prickle. The security footage showed her leaving, her eyes darting back to the house as if she wasn't done. To this day, I still think about how easily they could have missed it if they hadn't have had that monitor, or if they hadn't trusted their kids' instincts. The boy's stories, dismissed as imagination, had been a cry for help. Who knows how long it would have gone on for? She was normal on paper, polite during interviews, and experienced background checks came back clean. Yet, beneath that polished surface, something had festered, something that thrived in the dark. I stayed on with the family, but the house felt different. The boy's laughter was slower to come, his eyes scanning the doorway at night. We moved the monitor to a new angle, covering every inch of the room, but I couldn't shake the image of her standing there, her shadow stretching across the floor. The parents hired a new nanny, a cheerful woman who sang to the boy, but I watched her closely. My trust fractured. Weeks later, I found a forum on X where others shared similar stories, nannies caught on camera, their actions ranging from neglect to something darker. One user mentioned a case in Ohio, a caregiver who'd whispered strange things to a sleeping child, caught only because of a monitor. Another spoke of a key found hidden in a plant, used to enter homes uninvited. The threads were a chilling reminder. The people we trust with our children aren't always who they seem. The boy started drawing pictures, crayon sketches of a tall lady with no face standing in his doorway. I showed them to the mother, who paled but said nothing, tucking them away. We never spoke of the nanny again, but I noticed the parents checked the monitor obsessively. Their phones always open to the app. The new locks gleamed, but they couldn't lock out the fear that lingered, a guest that never left. I left the job a year later, needing distance from the memories. The family sent me a card, thanking me, but I couldn't bring myself to visit. The boy's last drawing stayed with me, a figure in the doorway, its eyes two black scribbles, and above it, in shaky letters, the word watching. I keep my own apartment locked tight now, no cameras, no monitors. But at night, when the world is quiet, I swear I hear footsteps outside my door, soft and deliberate, pausing just long enough to listen. Story number 12, The Nanny's Betrayal. The backyard pool sparkled under the sun, but something about it felt wrong today. My wife, Clara, and I had hired a live-in nanny to manage our 3 kids, Lily, Max, and Emma, while we juggled demanding careers. We both had quite good jobs in our separate industries, and with 3 young children, it was impossible to balance everything. The agency sent us Sarah, barely 19, who seemed decent at first, but her carelessness grew like a shadow. And now, watching the kids splash in the pool, I felt a knot of dread I couldn't shake. The garden was quiet, too quiet, the air thick with unease. I had instructed the nanny to take the children to the small pool we had in our back garden upstairs. I told Sarah to keep their life vests on, no exceptions. The kids weren't strong swimmers, and Clara and I weren't there to watch them. I was in my office, staring at my computer, but my mind kept drifting to the pool, to the silence that felt too heavy. I called out, telling them I'd bring towels soon. Why did I let them stay out there with her? The kids' laughter should have been reassuring, but it wasn't. She was instructed to not let them remove their life vests for any circumstances, as the children were not completely comfortable swimming independently yet. I gave them 5 more minutes, trying to focus on my work. Then came the sound. Sharp, desperate sobs cutting through the air like a blade. I bolted from my chair, heart racing, and ran outside. Lily, my eldest, was clinging to the pool's edge, weeping, her face pale with terror. I knelt beside her, my hands shaking as I pulled her from the water. I make my way outside, and I see my eldest child spit in water like they'd been choking. "What happened?" I demanded. Sarah stammered, claiming Lily had been disobedient, but her story was flimsy, her eyes dodging mine. Lily's voice trembled as she told me the truth, each word a punch to my gut. She decided to take off her life vest, which I admit wasn't a good idea. She jumped into the deep end, unable to touch the bottom, and begged for help. Sarah had done nothing, just watched, cold and detached, as my daughter fought for her life. The sitter swam up to my eldest, and when they asked her for help, she looked at them and said no, and swam away to see the other 2 children. Lily had gone under, choking on water before kicking hard enough to reach the shallow end. I could still see her small hands clutching the pool's edge, her eyes wide with betrayal. I grabbed the kids, wrapped them in towels, and sent Sarah inside. How could we have trusted her with our children? The house felt colder after that. The trust we'd placed in Sarah shattered. Naturally, when we checked the cameras, the one who was indeed telling the truth was my eldest child, and we were incredibly disappointed. The footage was damning. Sarah's indifference, her deliberate choice to ignore Lily's cries, played out in grainy clarity. I confronted her, my voice steady but burning with rage, and she offered no excuses, just a blank stare that chilled me. Clara came home, her face crumpling when she saw the video. We fired Sarah that night, her belongings packed before she could protest, but the damage lingered. Lily wouldn't go near the pool for weeks, her trust in adults shaken. I kept replaying the moment she went under, imagining what could have happened if she hadn't reached the edge. We reported Sarah to the agency, but their apologies felt hollow. How had we missed the sins, her inattention, her cruelty, cloaked in careless moments? I started checking on the kids more. Even when we hired a new nanny, a kind woman named Rachel, who won their hearts. But the fear stayed. A quiet whisper that anyone could betray us. The pool, once a place of joy, now felt like a trap waiting to close. Every splash I heard from my office made my heart lurch, as if the water itself was warning me. Had my eldest not been able to propel themselves forward, they might not be here today. That thought haunted me, a reminder of how close we'd come to losing her. We overhauled our routines, installing more cameras, double-checking references for anyone who came near our kids. I suppose the point of this story, if there even is one, is be careful who you trust with your children. I started working from home more, cutting meetings short to be there when the kids played outside. Clara and I became hyper-vigilant, watching for any sign of neglect, any hint of danger. The kids sensed it too. Lily clung to us more, her eyes searching ours for reassurance. I'd catch her staring at the pool as if it held the memory of that day, a shadow she couldn't shake. We talked to her, explaining that Sarah was gone, that she was safe now, but words couldn't erase the fear. I began to notice things I'd ignored before, how Sarah's bad days had been more frequent, how her smiles never reached her eyes. The agency admitted they'd rushed her placement, prioritizing speed over scrutiny. That admission felt like a betrayal. Too, a reminder that we'd entrusted our children to a system that failed us. We considered draining the pool, covering it over, but the kids loved it too much to let it go. So we stayed, but I never let them swim alone again, not even with Rachel. The backyard felt different now, its edges sharper, its quiet heavier. Every night I checked the locks, the cameras, the kids' rooms, as if I could guard against every threat, all because we put our trust in someone we thought we could trust in. But sadly, we were mistaken. The pool still sparkles, but it holds a secret now, a warning that trust can drown you if you're not careful. The incident changed us, carved a line between before and after. I dream of that day sometimes, of Lily's face as she gasped for air, of Kara's cold eyes watching her struggle. I wake up sweating, checking on the kids even when I know they're safe. We've moved on, but the pool remains a silent reminder of what we almost lost. Rachel is wonderful, and the kids adore her, but I still watch her closely, waiting for a crack in her kindness. Clara says I'm paranoid, but she checks the cameras too. Her trust is fragile as mine. We've taught the kids to swim better, to wear their life vests without question. But I can't teach them to unsee Sarah's betrayal. Lily's stronger now, but I see the caution in her eyes, the way she scans the yard before stepping outside. The new nanny follows our rules to the letter, but I still hover, unable to let go of the fear. What if we'd lost her? What if the next person we trust is just as careless? The world feels less certain now. The safety we took for granted gone. I wonder if Sarah even understood the weight of what she did, or if she's out there, caring for someone else's kids, carrying that same indifference, and that's a terrifying thought. Trust is a fragile thing, easily broken, and once it's gone, you're left watching the water, waiting for the next ripple. Have you ever trusted someone only to realize they were never who you thought they were? Story number 13, The Watchful Eye. Trust is a luxury when your children's safety is at stake. When our second child arrived, our home became a whirlwind of sleepless nights and endless demands. We hired a nanny, polished and poised, her references glowing like a beacon of hope. But I wasn't convinced. Years as a social worker had carved a deep mistrust in me, a reflex born from seeing the worst in humanity. Years of working as a social worker have taught me to never take people at face value, not when kids are involved. So I installed cameras, their silent lenses streaming every moment to my phone, a lifeline to my children's world. Some instincts scream louder than reason. out of what I can only describe as deep-rooted paranoia from everything I'd witnessed in my career, neglect, the unthinkable. I had cameras installed in our home, which were live streamed straight to our phones. The nanny seemed perfect, too perfect, perhaps, but I couldn't shake the unease. Every smile she gave my 2-year-old, every coo to my 5-month-old, felt like a performance under scrutiny. I went about my work, visiting foster kids miles away, but my phone was never far. It screened a window to the home I'd left behind. Then the call came, and everything shattered. Rage is a quiet fire until it consumes you. My husband called. His voice wasn't panicked, but there was a hard edge to it. "You need to see the camera feed." I pulled over, my hands trembling as I opened the app. I pulled over and watched in disbelief. Our nanny had locked our 2-year-old in her bedroom alone for hours. Worse, she hadn't picked up our 5-month-old once in 4 hours, not to change him, not to comfort him, not even to feed him properly. The footage was a gut punch. My toddler's cries muffled behind a closed door, my infant left with a bottle propped on pillows, abandoned like forgotten luggage. I felt the world tilt, my heart a war drum in my chest. Betrayal cuts deeper when it's your children. Instead, she had propped up his bottle with a pile of pillows and walked away, left a 5-month-old lying there like an afterthought. The nanny sat in the living room, scrolling her phone, oblivious to the lives she'd neglected. My husband's voice crackled through the phone, steady but seething, as he watched the same feed with his co-workers, their outrage a chorus in the background. He stayed on the line with me the entire drive home, maybe to make sure I didn't do something I'd regret. The road blurred through my tears, each mile fueling a fury I'd never known. I wasn't just angry. I was a mother betrayed, and that was a force of its own. Some lines, once crossed, can't be uncrossed. I stormed into the house, the door slamming behind me. The nanny looked up, startled, her excuses already forming, but I didn't let her speak. I was livid. I walked in and fired her on the spot. Her protests fell on deaf ears as I pointed to the door, my voice shaking with the weight of what I had seen. My husband stood by, later confessing he'd kept his phone ready for bail money, half expecting me to lose control. My husband later said it was one of the most satisfying things he'd ever seen, but he admitted he kept his phone ready just in case I needed bail money. The house felt tainted, its safety violated, but my children were in my arms, and that was enough for now. The aftermath was a reckoning. I replayed the footage in my mind, each frame a reminder of how close we'd come to something worse. Looking back, I realized it could have been worse, much worse. The cameras, born of my paranoia, had been our salvation, exposing a truth we might never have seen. I thought of the cases I'd worked, children left in neglect, their cries unheard, and knew my own had been spared that fate. That moment changed everything. I quit working not long after and have been home ever since. My career, once the core of who I was, felt trivial compared to the need to protect my own. Vigilance is a gift, forged in pain. The trauma I'd spent years witnessing had done one good thing. It gave me the kind of hypervigilance that probably saved my kids from something worse. I became their shield, their constant, trading boardrooms for bedtime stories. The house was ours again, its corners no longer hiding threats. But the memory of that day lingered. I checked the cameras obsessively. Even after the nanny was gone, as if the betrayal could return. Friends asked why I'd left my job, why I'd changed so much, but I couldn't explain the weight of what I'd seen. Some scars shape you for the better. Years later, I found peace in being home, in the laughter of my children. Now older, but still my world. The nanny's face faded, but her negligence became a lesson. Trust is earned, never given. I shared my story with other parents, urging them to listen to their instincts, to watch when no one else would. The social worker in me never left. She just found a new purpose. My children grew up safe, loved, and whole, and that was worth every sacrifice. But at night, when the house is quiet, I still check the locks, still feel the echo of that day, a reminder that safety is a choice you make every day. Story number 14, The Child Who Watches. The house knows your secrets. Its walls, draped in ivy, whisper as you pass. Their murmurs too soft to catch, but too real to ignore. You're not a guest here. Something watches, not with curiosity, but with intent, waiting for you to falter. This isn't a home, it's a trap, and you've already stepped inside. The mistake was saying yes. I was accepted into the position of an au pair for a family called the Hamiltons. They lived in a beautiful old home in a quiet English village. Ivy-covered stone walls, rose gardens, the kind of place you'd see in a film. The job paid really well. I had my own room with a locking door. It seemed perfect, a chance to live in a storybook setting. Rachel and Martin, the parents, were both professional, soft-spoken, and polite. Their son, Oliver, was 7. He was quiet, polite, maybe too polite for his age. The first time I met him, he stared up at me with these pale blue eyes and said something I'll never forget. "I hope you don't get scared easily." I laughed, thinking it was a child's quirk. I was wrong. The house had a weight, a stillness that pressed against my skin. The roses outside were too red, their thorns too sharp, as if they guarded more than the garden. The first week went by smoothly enough, though there were odd moments. Toys would appear at the foot of my bed at night, even though I always made sure the door was locked. I'd wake up to his drawings slipped under my door. Black scribbled things, people hanging from the trees, figures with no faces. When I'd asked him about it, he just shrugged and smiled. His smile was wrong, too knowing for a child. The house was watching me through him. I didn't see it coming. The first time he tried to hurt me was subtle. I was cleaning up breakfast while he played in the garden. When I went out to call him in, I didn't see the tripwire stretched low between 2 trees, and I hit the ground hard, head bouncing off a root. I remember blinking up at that gray sky while he stood over me, expressionless. "You shouldn't have come here," he said softly before turning and walking away. I told his mother, Rachel, who gave me a tight smile and said, "You really need to be more careful. You're the adult here." Her words were sharp, a warning, dressed as advice. The garden felt different after that, its paths twisting in ways I couldn't map. The second time was worse. The second time he waited until I was in the bath. I always locked the bathroom door, but that night I couldn't latch it. I heard it creak open. When I tried to stand, I realized he'd poured liquid soap all over the tiled floor. I slipped hard, slamming my back into the bathtub edge, and scrambled out, shaken and sore. I caught a glimpse of him peeking round the door frame. He didn't run. He just stared at me and said, "You screamed louder the last time." Last time? What does he mean, the last time? My heart raced. The room buzzed, the mirror fogged, but I swore I saw a shape behind me, not Oliver, something taller, faceless. The Hamiltons closed ranks. When I confronted the parents again, their entire demeanor shifted. Martin told me I was too highly strung. Rachel accused me of projecting problems onto their son. She knelt beside Oliver, looked him right in the eye, and said, "Don't worry, sweetheart. She won't blame you anymore. It's not your fault she can't handle it." Their words were a wall, unyielding and cold. That same night, they removed my bedroom key. They told me they didn't think I needed that kind of barrier between me and the family. The house felt alive now. The floorboards groaned at night, not with age, but with purpose. I could hardly sleep. For 3 nights, I kept a chair propped under the doorknob and lay fully dressed in bed. A heavy flashlight clutched in my hand. I'd hear him out there. His footsteps were too heavy for a child, deliberate, pausing outside my door. The final straw broke me. The night before I left, I caught him trying to slide a knife under my door, just slowly pushing it through the crack. The blade gleamed, hungry. That was it. I told the Hamiltons I was leaving in the morning. Rachel stared at me with that kind of blank smile. "Of course, we understand." But they didn't let me go easily. When I tried to take my suitcase downstairs, Martin blocked the stairwell. "You'll need to find another way," he said flatly. "You're not taking anything down the stairs. Rachel doesn't want Oliver seeing you leave. They were protecting him, or something else." So I threw everything out of the second-floor window, boxes, clothes, my suitcase, which burst open on the gravel drive, and they watched from the porch as I packed the car. Oliver smiled at me one last time, standing between his parents. His eyes weren't a child's. They were old, empty, and they saw through me. I fled, the village shrinking in my rearview mirror. I reported everything to my agency, and they told me they'd look into it. A few weeks later, I checked the family listings again. They were looking for a new au pair. It was the same house and same child, but this time under a different name. They hadn't stopped. The house was a lure, its beauty a mask for something darker. I started digging. Locals whispered about the Hamiltons, or whatever they called themselves. The village had a history, missing visitors, children who spoke in riddles, houses that burned but stood again. Oliver wasn't just a boy. He was a vessel, a key to something the Hamiltons served, something that needed new blood to keep it fed. I can't go back. The nightmares followed me. I'd wake to scratches on my door, faint but real. Though I lived alone, a drawing appeared in my mailbox and black scribbles of a faceless figure just like Oliver's. He hadn't forgotten me. I found an old book in a second-hand shop, its pages brittle, describing watchers, children bound to ancient entities, their families complicit in rituals to keep the pact. The Hamiltons' house matched the description. Ivy, roses, a garden that never died. They were still out there. I contacted the agency again, but the listing was gone. The village's website vanished, as if it never existed. The house was waiting. Every night, I check my locks. I sleep with the light on, the flashlight still by my bed. Sometimes I hear footsteps, too heavy for a child, pausing outside my door. I see his eyes in the dark, pale blue, unblinking, and older than time. He's still watching. I don't know if I escaped or if I'm still part of their game. If you're offered a job in a quiet village, don't take it. Don't look into those eyes. Don't let them see you falter. They'll never let you go. Story number 15, The Silent Boy's Secret. The house loomed over the lake, its windows like eyes that never blinked. When I was 16, my friend and I took a babysitting job in a quiet lakeside town. The town was sleepy, nestled between pines and water, but the mansion we worked in felt alive, its halls too grand, its shadows too deep. Every creak of the floorboards seemed to whisper a warning. Only she was officially hired, but we always went together. It was our pact, two of us against the strangeness of that place. We were there for a boy barely 6, with eyes that saw everything and a voice he rarely used. His silence wasn't a shyness. It was a wall, built to keep something out or in. He was a puzzle, and I wanted to solve him. We were watching a little boy of about 6. His name was Eli, small for his age, with a gaze that cut through you. He never really spoke though, but he listened and watched and understood everything. He'd follow us around, his footsteps soft, his presence heavy with unspoken thoughts. Sometimes, when no one else was near, he'd lean close and murmur a single word, safe or hide, before retreating into his quiet world. I felt it then, a tug in my chest, like he was trying to tell me something without breaking a vow. Every now and then, if we were alone, he'd whisper a word or two to me. Those words were gifts, rare and fragile, and I held them close. The first crack in the facade came during a game. The first time I really felt something was off was when we were playing hide and seek. The house was a maze of rooms, perfect for disappearing. Eli grabbed my hand, his grip firm, and led me up the grand staircase to his father's bedroom. The air was heavy, the kind of stillness that makes your skin prickle. He tugged on my hand and led me straight to his dad's bedroom. He opened a drawer with steady hands, revealing a stack of letters, sealed and yellowed, addressed to someone I didn't know. His eyes met mine, flat but urgent, as if the letters held a truth he couldn't voice. Then, just as quickly, he closed the drawer and pulled me away, back to the game. We curled up behind a big armchair in the study. We stayed there, his small bush pressed against mine, his breaths shallow, like he was hiding from more than just my friend. The house held secrets, and Eli knew them all. We stayed there a while, him curled up in my lap like he was trying to be invisible. He whispered, "Stay." His voice so soft I almost missed it. I nodded, my heart racing, though I didn't know why. The mansion felt wrong, its opulence a mask for something darker. His father was some kind of consultant, always vague about details. He'd come home late, his smile too wide, his charm too practiced. One evening, he returned early, his eyes glinting with something couldn't name. He offered us drinks, sweet, syrupy liquid that burned my throat, and laughed too loudly, inviting us to see his garage. He said he wanted to show us something cool. The garage was a shrine to wealth, gleaming cars, polished bikes, but it felt like a trap. My friend, bolder than me, climbed into a car with him, their laughter echoing as they sped around the lot. I stayed back, my stomach twisting, watching the shadows move. Eli's silence grew heavier, his eyes sadder. The last time we babies, he was different, distant, his small hands clutching mine like a lifeline. I asked what was wrong, but he only stared at the floor, his silence louder than words. I asked him what was wrong while my friend was preparing some lunch for us. He led me back to his father's bedroom. His steps, slow, deliberate. He just tugged my hand and took me back to his father's bedroom. He pointed to the drawer again, his eyes brimming with the tears, and I understood he was afraid, not of the house, but of his father. The letters, I realized, weren't just old mail. They were proof of something hidden, something his father didn't want found. I wanted to ask, to help, but his gaze begged me to stay quiet. When his father returned, his charm was sharper, his questions too personal. He asked about our lives, our dreams, his words slick with intent. He started making more small talk with us than ever before. I cut the night short, pulling my friend away, her confusion clear. We left, but Eli stayed with me. At home, I told my friend about the letters, Eli's fear, the unease that clung to that house. We called the police, our voices shaken, but they dismissed us. Two teenagers with a wild story. We tried to call the police, but of course they weren't going to buy what two 8-year-olds were saying. We never went back. The money not worth the weight of that place. I still wonder about that boy. I wonder what became of him. Years later, I searched for news of Eli, hoping he'd escaped whatever shadow his father cast. The mansion was sold, the lake town quiet. But his face, those silent, pleading eyes, haunts me. I wonder if he ever found his voice, if those letters ever told their story. The house was absolutely massive, and in its halls I left a piece of myself, tied to a boy who spoke in whispers and secrets.